Imagine this. You've got the science, the data checks out, the funding's secure. Your team is working 14 hours a day, and yet somehow you're still behind.
If you are responsible for improving any system, how do we normally do it? And a good analogy of that is to think about a system as a chain of tasks, work that has to be completed to achieve a specific goal, and there's resources that you need, right?
The trial's delayed, the submission's stuck, the product's not launching. You're in endless meetings, rewriting decks, chasing approvals, firefighting problems that weren't even there on the roadmap.
So the traditional way of trying to analyze, improve, and manage systems is I take that chain and I break it up into its various links, and I try to analyze and improve and manage each of the links. I try to find out what's the problem with every link.
This is the reality of life sciences, a world of mission-driven people working with brilliant minds, cutting-edge tools, and still constantly running into walls that seem invisible. Today we are going to talk about something that might just change the way you see your work, your team, and your impact.
People are familiar with Dr. Goldratt's book called The Goal. Jeff Bezos says it's one of the 3 most important books that he read. Elon Musk have read it and used it. Jensen Huang from NVIDIA. Most of the top entrepreneurs have read that book and have applied it, right? But there's another book that Goldratt wrote called Necessary But Not Sufficient.
Today we are going to talk about something that might just change the way you see your work, your team, and your impact. Not a new app, not a shiny framework, but a mindset shift so powerful that it's been used to transform billion-dollar businesses, governments, and humanitarian operations. It's called the theory of constraints. And to help us do that, I'm joined by someone who doesn't just understand constraints, he solves them. Dr. Alan Bernard is one of the world's leading decision scientists, the CEO of Goldratt Research Labs, and a pioneer in applying systems thinking to some of the most complex challenges across business, technology, and health. Alan, if every pharma leader in the world was listening to you right now, and you could say just one thing, what would it be?
It's having the courage to go back to the basics and focusing on what really mattered.
Before we jump into today's episode, I just want to say something from the heart. Over 93% of the people who watch this podcast regularly haven't subscribed. And listen, I get it. Life is busy. You click, you watch, you move on. But if you've ever felt like this show brings you value, if it has made you think, sparked a new idea, introduced you to something inspiring, then I have a small favor to ask. Please hit that subscribe button. It might not seem like much, but to me, it means everything. This podcast has always been a labor of love. No sponsors, no script, just honest conversations with people trying to make a difference in the world of healthcare. And your support, your one click, helps me keep doing that. It helps more people discover these voices. It helps this community grow. So if you're here, if you believe in this, please consider subscribing. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the episode. Imagine this. You've got the science, the data checks out, the funding's secured. Your team is working 14 hours a day, and yet somehow you're still behind. The trial's delayed, the submission's stuck, the product's not launching. You're in endless meetings, rewriting decks, chasing approvals, firefighting problems that weren't even there on the roadmap. And the most frustrating part, no one can tell you why. This is the reality of life sciences, a world of mission-driven people working with brilliant minds, cutting-edge tools, and still constantly running into walls that seem invisible. But what if the problem isn't how hard we are working? What if the real problem is what we are working on? Today we are going to talk about something that might just change the way you see your work, your team, and your impact. Not a new app, not a shiny framework, but a mindset shift so powerful that it's been used to transform billion-dollar businesses, governments, and humanitarian operations. It's called the theory of constraints. And no, it's not just about manufacturing lines and supply chains. Today we are going to show you how it applies to everything. Drug development, regulatory strategy, medical affairs, even your mailbox. And to help us do that, I'm joined by someone who doesn't just understand constraints, he solves them. Dr. Alan Bernard is one of the world's leading decision scientists, the CEO of Goldratt Research Labs, and a pioneer in applying systems thinking to some of the most complex challenges across business, technology, and health. He has advised Microsoft, PHP, the United Nations, you name it. He co founded his lab alongside Dr. Ellie Goldratt himself, and he has developed AI powered decision tools that are changing how the world's most influential organizations think. In today's episode, we go deep into bottlenecks you didn't know were there, into decisions that feel impossible until they aren't. This is not just a conversation about fixing broken systems, it's a conversation about unlocking human potential in the most high stakes industry in the world. Dr. Bernard, welcome to Drug Diaries.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
It's a pleasure to have you on Drug Diaries. Dr. Bernard, you've worked with everyone from Microsoft to mining giants to pharma players. But I want to start with a simple question. When did you first realize that most people and most companies are trying to solve the wrong problem?
It's a great question to start off with. When you think about it, if you are responsible for improving any system, how do we normally do it? And a good analogy of that is to think about a system as a chain of tasks, work that has to be completed to achieve a specific goal, and there's resources that you need. So the traditional way of trying to analyze and manage systems is I take that chain and I break it up into its various links, and I try to analyze and improve and manage each of the links. I try to find out what's the problem with every link.
Right.
I try to solve that. I try to improve that link. Unfortunately, that's just not how systems work. The sum of a local optima is not equal to the system optima. So all that happens when we follow that approach, that reductionist approach, is we end up improving the parts. We end up solving problems at the part level, but not necessarily, as you mentioned, the right problem. So for many years, we've known that we should follow a systems approach or a holistic approach when you try to analyze and improve and manage systems. Like the pharma, whether it's a small little startup or a massive Fortune 500 company, right, as a pharma company, or the whole system of healthcare, these are all complex systems. We know that we should follow a systems approach, but practically, how do you do it? How do I differentiate between all the parts that I can improve, between all the problems that I can solve, and the one part or the one problem I must solve next to improve the whole system? That is the holy grail of the systems approach, and nobody had practically solved that problem until Dr. Goldratt came around with his theory of constraints. Now, for those that might immediately react negatively to the word theory, I always quote Dr. Kurt Lewin. He was a very famous psychologist. He said, there's nothing as practical as a good theory. So just keep that in mind. So what was Dr. Goldratt's theory? Like all theories, it's just a simple explanation of why something is really important and useful. And what Dr. Goldratt claimed is that knowledge of a constraint of a system is extremely important and useful when you're trying to analyze and improve and manage the whole system. What he discovered was a kind of a hack that says you can analyze and improve and manage that whole system, that whole chain, by analyzing, improving, and managing the weakest link, the constraint of the system. And it doesn't matter if your chain has 3 links, if you're just a small startup, or it has 30,000 links. If you're this Fortune 500 company, it doesn't matter. How many weakest links does it have, that system? Only one.
Right.
So that's the essence, I hope in a nutshell, of this hugely important discovery that Dr. Goldratt made with his theory of constraints, is he realized that ultimately we are responsible as leadership teams to analyze, improve, and manage the overall system in a most effective and efficient way. And the most effective and efficient way of doing that is to analyze, improve, and manage the constraint or the weakest link of that system.
Right. Wow, that's profound. And Alan, before we dive into the theory of constraints or the depths of theory of constraints, I want to ask you, what's the biggest constraint you've ever faced as a person, not as a consultant, and what did it teach you?
I think that if you think about what is a constraint, because we have to define what a constraint is first, right? Because else if we have different definitions, we'll talk past each other. So again, if I think about a system, the system could be me, right? But it could be a company, it could be an organization, it could be even a whole country. The system has a goal, right? For a human being, it's to survive and thrive. Right?
Yes.
And for a company, it's to make more and more money in a responsible way into the future. So that system has a goal. To achieve that goal, whether the goal is an impact goal or an income goal, it has to do work. It has to produce a product or produce a service. And in order to produce that product or service, it needs resources. So the more clear I have a goal, the more clear I am what work I have to do, what resources I need, but also how much of every resource I need. If I have a goal to feed 1 million people, that would tell me what work I need to do, what resources I need, and how much. If I have a goal of making $1 million, the same thing, right? So what is a constraint? A constraint is a resource that I need to achieve more of the goal, and I don't have enough of it. That's what a constraint is. So when it comes to us as individuals, what are the resources that you have to carefully allocate to achieve your goal of surviving and thriving? And there's at the most heart of it, it's our attention, right? What and who we pay attention to will make all the difference in life. So that was a huge insight for me. And I actually got it from reading a paper by Herbert Simon. He's a very famous pioneer in the field of AI and operations research. Back in 1972, he was already stating, he said that the bottleneck is going to move very quickly from having the right amount of data and knowledge, turning that into information to help us make better, faster decisions. The constraint or the bottleneck is going to move quickly from the data availability to our ability to process the data, which is our attention. And he predicted that management attention will become the ultimate bottleneck, not just for us as individuals, but also for organizations, because organizations are made up of people. So once I realized that ultimately that is my constraint, is my limited attention. And how can we check? I want all the listeners or viewers to do this following check in their mind. I want you to think about all the things that demand your attention or could benefit from your attention right now, right? So think about how much is that? That's the demand, right? Now think about how much available attention do you have? We, of course, have 24 hours a day, but that's total time. Attention is a very scarce form of time. It's a time that we have to make meaningful progress towards the goals that are really important to us. So if I ask you, how much attention do you have every day? It'll probably just be a few hours, right? So it's the demand, we have the supply. That is why our limited attention is often the most scarcest and precious resource that we have as human beings. But we should treat it in the same way that we should treat any constraint. What theory of constraint says is once you've identified the constraint, the thing that you don't have enough of, it could be, I don't have enough demand for my product or service, right? That I provide as an individual or as a company. Or I have enough, but I don't have enough capacity to meet that demand, or I don't have enough external supply or cash or attention. Those are my 5 types of constraints. Once I know where the constraint is, the first step is don't waste it by using it to do stuff or be with people that doesn't matter. That doesn't help me to get more of the constraint, more of the goal, right? So that's always step number 1, is find out what I can stop doing to stop wasting my scarcest resource, whether it's market demand or capacity or supply or cash or attention. Same thing. Only once I've done that and I'm now getting the most out of it, but I still want to do more, right? I still am not achieving my full goal. Only then do I go and get more of that scarce resource. Maybe hire additional people, get more machines. Now with AI, be able to deploy AI to elevate my attention, right? Because it can get me to do much more, much faster, much better, and much cheaper than ever before. So it's a long answer to your question. Kind of how everything comes together, right, is our limited attention is our personal bottleneck, but as leaders, it also becomes the constraint for the whole company.
That's some food for thought and a call for me to do some introspection myself after our today's conversation. And let's talk about this chain analogy. You've said that most people try to strengthen every link, but what really matters is knowing which link breaks first. And why do you think that idea is so hard for organizations to grasp?
There's two things for it, two parts to it. The one is it's a very practical problem. If you think about a chain, right? When we think about weakest link, we can imagine this chain with one link that looks more like a little paper clip, right? And all the other links that are bold and it's like, that would be really easy, right? To find the weakest link. But that's not how chains look in real life. It looks like the links are almost all identical. They almost all seem to have about the same strength, the same length. They have the same level of reliability and maybe even the same weight. Those are our 4 dimensions that we can improve a chain. We can increase its strength, which is increasing its throughput, being able to do more. We can increase its speed, which is reducing the length of the chain, right? We can improve the reliability, make it better, or we can reduce the weight of the chain, which is make it less expensive, right? So the third problem is a very practical problem, is depending on which is my goal, do I want to make it, more, faster, better, cheaper? Where is the link that I should focus on when the links all look very similar? Right? So that's the first practical thing. And if I can't tell, then I'm going to try to improve any link. The other part is that the measurements are often causing us to focus on the wrong thing. Like in a real system, we are often measured on local efficiencies, how well we are utilizing our resources. And I want to give the readers a very practical example of this, why it's so detrimental to measure efficiency or utilization of resources. If I asked you, think about in the drug discovery process, there's a task, and I ask you, how long will it take you to do this one-day task, right? What is your answer? The right answer should be, it depends, right? Well, it depends on 2 things. First of all, the 1 day is probably an average, and maybe under the best case scenario, I can do it in a couple of hours. Worst case, maybe a day or 2. But that's not where most of the time is being lost. The second thing that determines how long it will take me to get that one-day task done is how busy I am currently. If I have nothing else on my plate, the one-day task will take 1 day, on average, right?
Yes.
But if I'm already 50% busy, that one-day task will have to wait in a queue for me, right?
Right.
And a day later, I can start working on it. So it will take 2 days. If I'm 80% busy, it'll take me 5 days to get that one-day task done. If I'm 90% busy, it'll take 10 days. If I'm 99% busy, which is where most people are in organizations, right? You don't see people twiddling their thumbs. Everybody's busy. But the reality is, if I'm 99% busy already, that one-day task will take me 100 days to do. Now, you want to think about how critical it is. In our prep call, you were mentioning that for typical drug company, for them to be able to make a discovery of a new drug, right? That could be a $10 billion business over a 10-year period, right? That's $1 million a day for every day that I'm losing. And guess how we are incentivizing people is based on how busy they are. So now I'm causing that whole drug discovery process to be waiting for you to become available, which will only happen in 100 days. And that's the key insight. So you get, in terms of theory of constraints, you get doing constraints. So resources that I don't have enough of to do more, but you also get waiting constraints. What is this process? What is the system waiting for? It's waiting for you as a resource. Your cost is maybe a couple of $1,000s a day, but the lost time is worth millions a day. And that's a fundamental difference. What theory of constraints are bringing into the system is to say, you didn't create your system to keep resources busy. That should not be the objective function. If you were training AI, right, with the objective function of keeping resources busy, guess what it will do? It will have piles of work in front of everybody, right? But everything will take years and years and years. If you give it the objective function, not as keeping resources busy, but to get flow, right? It will have enough resources to ensure that the flow is never waiting for resource. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about optimizing systems. And that's why the insights of theory of constraints is so profound and most people don't get it. Theory of constraints is not about debottlenecking, because all that happens with that is over time you build a balanced system. It's a chain with links that almost look identical. You get that in kind of lean efforts where they have the takt time, right? This is the rate at which I want to produce cars, and I want every machine to be able to meet this cycle time, this takt time. But what it creates is a balanced system that's chaotic, where the flow is frequently waiting for resources to become available, because there's obviously variability up and down. So I hope that was clear. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about not just optimization, but strategy. What is it that I want the system to achieve? Is it to maximize the utilization of the resources it has, or to maximize flow?
It's very well explained. And Alan, you've said that TOC is the practical way to do system thinking. Why do you think so many leaders are still stuck in the old mindset of improving every part rather than the whole?
I think it's, as I mentioned, the two core reasons is it's not always easy to figure out which part should I improve, right? Do I differentiate between all the parts that can be improved and the problems that can be solved from the few that must? Unless I have a framework that says, find the weakest link, improve that link, right? Find the longest link, reduce that link, find the heaviest link, make that one lighter, and solve the problem that you need to solve, it becomes very hard. And then on top of that, you have all these local metrics that reward us when we improve links, not the system, right? It becomes much more important to say, I've improved my link, and should be important is, did you help to improve the system? Make my link stronger, but you didn't make the change stronger, right? You've just created potential, but you actually haven't improved the system. So I think those are two fundamental reasons why it's not obvious.
Right. And Alan, during our conversation yesterday, during the prep call, you talked about the 5 types of constraints: demand, capacity, supply, cash, and management attention.
Yes.
If I'm leading a pharma company, how do I even begin to figure out which one is holding me back?
I think it's conceptually quite simple, right? As bottlenecks leave traces, right? There's backlogs, right?
Yes.
It's like a traffic system, right? You don't need to know anything about bottlenecks to recognize when you see one, there's a queue of traffic building up, right? So the practical way of doing it is to say, I'm starting with an ambitious target. So if I'm a non-profit, I'm starting with a target of what is the impact I want to make, right? I want to save 1 million people from starvation this year, right? Or if I'm a for-profit company, I want to make $100 million this year. So now I have the goal. What I now need to do is to calculate what that goal translates into for the demand for the product or service that I provide. And then into capacity. How much capacity would I need to achieve that goal? And then into supply, cash, and finally management attention. So we start off by saying, you want to feed 1 million people. Do you have enough demand? Is there a queue of customers already waiting to be fed? No. Well, that should then be the one thing, right?
Yes.
Go and solve that problem. Okay, now you have 1 million people waiting. They've signed up application form. I'd love to get your food, right? Now do you have enough capacity to reliably deliver that amount of food? The same if I'm a for-profit, right? I want to make $100 million, right? Great. What does that mean in terms of the number of products or services that I have to provide? Do you already have a long enough queue of customers waiting for that? If not, you have a demand constraint, and management attention should be focused solely first on solving that problem. Once you've solved it, then it could become a capacity problem. It could become a supply problem, which is essentially I need resources that are outside of my control, or it could become a cash problem, cash constraint, or finally attention. But the attention is constantly, where should I focus my attention on solving the next constraint? I hope that's helpful. So
Absolutely.
those 5 constraints actually need to be resolved in sequence.
You've worked with companies who are in survival mode, but also with world-class market leaders. Why do top-performing companies still need TOC? And what stops them from getting to the next level?
I think one of the things, it's often very hard to know if I'm doing the best that I can. And the bigger the companies become, the more you realize the resources, the leadership team start focusing more on protecting what they have rather than making that next big jump. This is
Yes.
one of the core problems with if you've probably read about the innovator's dilemma, right? Where companies that had all the size and the money and the resources and the power, somebody like Nokia, right, at that time, they were the biggest by far, right?
Yes.
Why they got caught out by Apple? It was inertia. It was the innovator's dilemma, right? They were thinking, we are doing the best that we can, not asking, could we do better? And how much better could we do? And what's the simplest, fastest way of doing much better? So when you're going bankrupt, you go instantly into survival mode. You will do whatever it takes to generate cash in order to get out of survival. So in those type of companies, it's not hard to create urgency. It's not hard to create hyper focus, right? To say, forget about all the other problems. If we don't solve this problem of getting cash very quickly, we're going to go bust. What is really hard is if you take a company that's already performing, maybe they're already the best in their industry. How do I generate urgency there, right? And that's kind of the element that theory of constraints brings in to say, doesn't matter how big you are, doesn't matter how good you are not achieving infinite goal units, which means that you have a constraint. Where is that constraint? And if you want a step change and improvement, focus all the efforts on finding and solving that constraint. And that's what we've done with companies like Microsoft and Cisco and Tata Steel, etc.
Right. And going back to the example of the clinical trials, we talked about it briefly, but let me walk you through a scenario we see all the time. Let's say a company is running a phase 2 clinical trial for a new drug. And this is a stage where you're testing how well the drug works in a specific group of patients before it moves on to larger, more expensive trials. And everything looked good on paper, strong science, funding in place, timelines set. But in reality, the trial is falling behind schedule. And when that happens, it creates a domino effect. Delays in future trials, more cost, and ultimately slower access to potentially life-saving treatments for patients. So here's what's going wrong. Patient recruitment is slow. Not enough eligible people are signing up. Doctors and clinical trial sites are disengaged. They either don't have time or don't feel invested. Data entry and cleaning are delayed, which pushes back the regulatory reporting. And there's siloed communication between clinical data and regulatory teams. The team is working really hard, everyone's maxed out, but the trial still feels stuck. So, Alan, from your lens, what might be the real constraint here? And how would you approach this problem using the TOC? And if we had to focus on just one part of the process to unlock momentum, where would you start?
So there's the two parts that make up that total time, right? You have the work time, which is the physical time it takes me to do the work, like to do the research, to do the clinical trial. And then there's the waiting time, right? The waiting time is I'm waiting to get enough people to sign up for the server. I'm waiting to get enough doctors to be available to actually manage the trial, etc. So that's the first place where I'm starting, is I'm looking at that total time. Maybe it's 3 years, and I'm saying that is just too long, right? I want to reduce it down to 1 year, or maybe, what's the fastest way if there was no waiting time? If it was purely dependent on the work it was doing, right? Maybe I can bring it down to just a few months, etc. So that's the first part is, am I losing time because of the work time just taking long? Because then I will focus on how to reduce the cycle time of the work, or am I waiting too long for things, right? So that's the first part. The second part, what you shared with me and what I always start doing is to say, what is the cost of a day delay? So we mentioned this drug company that $10 billion over 10 years, $8 million a day, the cost of a delay. So imagine this now. I'm saying to you, you have $8 million a day. That's the money on the table. Every day that you save me, you've saved me $8 million. How much faster could you get enough people if you could spend some of that? That's not a normal way that people think about it. Right? I'll tell you, I was on a call with a pharmaceutical company about 3 months ago, and we had identified a critical chain for the whole clinical study, right? So that's the longest path of tasks after I've considered task dependencies, prerequisites, etc., and resource dependencies, right? So I have this longest path. And we identified one of the people on the path. He had to phone up one of the key stakeholders to get a final decision. So we're sitting in a meeting and it's like, okay, so you're on a critical chain here. When are you going to get a decision? And he says, well, I've already got the meeting set up. It's our monthly meeting. It's coming up next Friday, right? I've put it on the agenda. We're going to get a decision then. And everybody just accepts it. And we move on to the next agenda item. I was the one that had to highlight to say, okay, I just want to understand. We are currently Tuesday. You are on a critical chain. Every day that we lose for the total duration.
Yes, yes.
So by you saying, because it's convenient, as decision maker and you, the first time you found a practical time to meet, that's the fastest we could do it now. This is going to cost us another $60 million. Could you maybe phone them up right now and ask them if they have everything they need to make the decision? And if not, what do they need? And how quickly can you get them? And maybe you can get the decision made in a few days rather than a week or two. So that's I think it's something that people don't really think about. What is the cost of everyday delay?
Yeah.
And what are you waiting for, right? Are you just waiting for the next meeting? Or are you practically waiting for some information that will magically only become available at the time of the meeting? How can I get that information? We call it full kitting, right? I have to do work or I have to make a decision. What is the full kit that I need? Tell me now so I can start assembling it. Because what often happens is you get to the meeting and the person says, well, I can't really make the decision yet because I'm waiting for this and this and this and this. And you said, well, why don't you tell me that? Well, I only thought about it now. So I think that's a key thing, is just focus on that critical chain. What is this? What is the flow waiting for? And seeing how we can squash the die. We have a lot of money on the table that we can spend if we realized it.
Right. Wow, that's very well explained. And I think you're right. It requires a fundamental shift in the mindset. It requires a different approach and a different mindset altogether to embrace the theory of constraint in totality. So very well explained. And most people think TOC is about fixing broken systems. But what about companies that are already great, those who want to leap to the next orbit? How does TOC help the best get even better?
Right. I'll give you one example. As we started working with Tata Steel in the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, and they were considered to be one of the most profitable, reliable, socially responsible steel manufacturers in the world. Already considered to be the best around. And the question is could they do much better? Now, when you think about that, is what would be the reference that you would use to convince them that it's possible to do much better? One reference would be, how long does it take them to convert a ton of iron ore out of one of their iron ore mines into a Tata car driving into a dealership, right? So we started with that and we started adding up. The simplest way to do it is not to add up the actual cycle times of the individual steps to convert iron ore into a car, because those are typically hours, right? It's to add up all the inventories that are sitting in between the steps, right? The stockpile of iron ore at the mine, the stockpile of iron ore at the steel plant, the stockpile of steel at the assembly plant, etc. Now, what we found, it's about 6 to 9 months. That's the total time it takes. So I gave them a reference, 90 Ford, from a ton of iron ore coming out of one of these iron ore mines until that iron ore drives into dealership as a Model T car. In 1926, with all the limits in technology that they had then, how long do you think that total supply chain was taking? 6 to 9 months, right? So just again, think about all the inventories in the system. That's a practical way of how many days of inventory in the system, right? 26, it was 81 hours. And the reason why is he had appointed flow managers, and they had only 2 jobs. They would track the flow of materials through that supply chain, and when it got stuck, it was waiting for something. It was waiting for a quality approval check. It was waiting for a ship to be loaded onto a barge on the river. It was waiting for something. They would get it unstuck, number one. And secondly, meeting, they would write a standard operating procedure to make sure it never gets stuck again. And
Right.
81 hours. So that was the target for Tata Steel, right? Is to say, yes, you're already profitable, you're already very reliable, but your lead times are still way too long. It makes you very unresponsive to changes in market demand, right? To tell the mine what to produce, I have to forecast 9 months into the future.
Hmm.
You know, we sometimes don't even know what we're going to sell tomorrow. What about thinking about what are we going to sell in 9 months, right?
Yes.
So that's a way of taking the best company and thinking about how can you apply theory of constraints. It's like, how long is it actually taking us to do it?
Right. And let's flip it for a moment. How do I know if I'm not ready for TOC? What kind of mindset or organization won't benefit from it? At least not yet.
Yes. I think if you are comfortable with your current status quo, if you either don't need to do better
Yes.
or don't want to do better, then TOC is not for you. Theory of constraints has a single goal, is to help systems do better because they have to or want to. So that's the only prerequisite.
That's a very simple and crisp, concise definition.
And you have to respect, right? I've
Yeah.
realized, like, I still struggle to understand that mindset because I'm driven. I'm always trying to improve and do better and better and better. But for some reason, especially in Europe, there are many companies that are running and they have no need or desire to grow, right? So if you go and present theory of constraints to them, you immediately get resistance. Why? Right? We're doing okay. We're happy, you know? And you get
Yeah.
people like that. They are okay with what they've got, and that's perfect, right? So those are not the dream customers of theory of constraints. The dream customer of a theory of constraints is a person or company or organization that either need to do not just a little bit better, but much better, or they want to do much better. Those are our perfect dream customers.
And now, if we add another element into this conversation or the overall dynamics, is the AI and robotics. You mentioned that AI and robotics could solve many capacity or capital constraints. In your view, what role will AI play in breaking the bottlenecks that pharma still hasn't cracked?
It's both exciting and scary to think about the full implications of what AI and robotics is going to enable us to do, right? So if you think about any knowledge-based or labor-based capacity constraint or capability constraint, AI and robotics together can overcome any of those, and not by a little bit. It's if you think about if you were measuring productivity as throughput multiplied by quality, so doing more faster and better, that's your top line, over the total cost, right? That's your productivity equation. How much more can AI and robotics help you do?
Yeah.
It's not 10%, it's X often, 100X sometimes, right? How much better can it help us to do it compared to human beings, right? Again, it's not 10%, it's often magnitudes. And how much cheaper? Well, I could pay a human being, you know, $2,000, $4,000, $10,000 a month, or I can pay AI $20 a month, right?
Mm.
So the productivity improvements that we're going to be seeing are going to be 1,000Xs,
Yeah.
right? So any capacity or capability constraint, AI and robotics are going to be able to solve much faster, much cheaper than before. But also capital, right? If you think about a practical thing, if you wanted to make a movie in the past, you'd probably have to raise a few $100 million. In the future, it's going to be take your imagination and record a long prompt, tell the whole story, and the AI is going to produce the whole movie for you, right? Probably not a few seconds or minutes, but maybe a few hours, right?
Yeah.
So any industry that was previously limited because there was such a high barrier to entry and the amount of capital that you need, AI and robotics is going to overcome all of that. And then the last one, it's also going to overcome connection constraints. So one of our biggest challenges is connecting with our dream customers, right?
Yes.
So you're already starting to see AI-based marketing agencies where you just say, listen, I have this product, help me sell as much as you can. And it will go and do the market research for you. It'll find the dream customers. It will find where they are. It will generate the Facebook and Instagram and YouTube ads. It will run the campaigns, right? Create a little website where they just swipe their credit card. So I think it's going to be massively exciting from that perspective. And I think ultimately, the only jobs that will be protected will be entrepreneurs that have the courage to want to solve big problems. I think you're going to probably the people in the trades, electricians, plumbers, where it still involve a lot of handy manual work, will be protected for some time, but robots will soon replace that as well, right? So you're going to
Yeah.
walk through a factory and you're going to be seeing mostly robots in the factory, right? Where the other element is digital twins. So for the pharma industry, I think from a trial perspective, that is going to be the biggest game changer. So at the moment, as you mentioned, you struggle to find a big enough sample of representative people. Mostly in the past, it was mostly white males that were participating in all the clinical trials, right?
Yes.
You didn't really know how the drug would respond in terms of efficacy with all the other demographics, right? Now imagine you have a digital twin that can represent the biology of any human being. And you can do the drug testing on as many of those as you want. And that digital twin is accurate enough that it will show you exactly how the body will react to that specific drug. Not generically, but that specific person, right? So we're going to have that. And that's probably going to be 10, 15 years away, where you will have a digital twin of yourself. And if you wanted to evaluate the efficacy of a drug, you will test it on your digital twin first. And it will have your full genetics, your epigenetics. It will know exactly how your body will respond. That, to me, is the future of drug treatment. And testing is that we're going to be testing it more and more on digital twins.
Right. And with all the new tech, new tools, and new talent flooding into healthcare, what's the one old idea or mindset you think we need to leave behind?
I think that there's a great book. Most people are familiar with Dr. Goldratt's book called The Goal, right? That was the book that became one of the 150 most read books of all time. If you haven't read it, Jeff Bezos says it's one of the 3 most important books that he read. Elon Musk have read it and used it. Jensen Huang from NVIDIA. Most of the top entrepreneurs have read that book and have applied it, right? But there's another book that Goldratt wrote called Necessary But Not Sufficient. It's also a novel, but it tells the story where the main protagonists are a company that have developed new software, very powerful software that can overcome major limitations for a company, but it's not delivering the expected value. And you have to ask the question, why? So what he shared in the book is 2 fundamental principles that I think all your listeners or viewers can immediately apply when it comes to advanced technologies like AI, robotics, digital twins. First question, for this technology to create value for your company or for you personally, it can only do that if and only if it diminishes a limitation for you. It overcomes some kind of constraint, right? It turns out that currently about 90% of the AI projects are not delivering positive ROIs. And most of it is because they are not targeting constraints. They bring any link that says, I want to try AI. Great, here it is. Okay, how is this going to help the system? Great, it allowed me to do things better, faster, cheap, but it didn't really help the system, right? So that's the first check that you do. Be very strategic about it. Where is your constraint currently? Do you have a demand constraint, capacity, supply, cash, or management attention constraint? How can AI help me get more of that scarce resource? But there's a second thing that most people overlook that said before the technology, we had to live with that limitation, right?
Yeah.
So we developed modes of operations or rules to practically live with the limitation. What would happen if you introduced a new technology but you never changed the old rule that acknowledged its limitation? And for me, the best example of this is if I asked you, why do you think both private and public companies do annual budgeting? Why do I do it once a year, right? Now with data and information, we can get updates all the time, right? It was because it was a rule that was implemented at a stage where the limitation was the time it took us to get all the data. The demand forecast, the supply, the costings, etc. This took a couple of months to assemble. So we said, practically, let's do this only once a year. Now we have new ERP systems like SAP and Oracle and Salesforce and all of these things. And we've got AI and big data that can instantly get you that information. And yet we never change the old rule. We still do budgeting once a year. So we for people to forecast a year in advance what the hell the demand is going to be, what the costs will be. Who the hell knows? So why don't we do it at least quarterly or maybe even monthly? We'll become much more dynamic. We'll end up generating much less waste, etc. So that to me is for all the companies out there, be very careful. The fact that AI, robotics, digital twins are extremely powerful technologies that has the real potential of overcoming almost any constraint doesn't mean it will automatically create value for your company. You have to make sure that it actually addresses a constraint. And secondly, that you've changed the old rules that allowed you to live with that limitation before.
And then if every pharma leader in the world was listening to you right now, and you could say just one thing, what would it be?
It's having the courage to go back to the basics and focusing on what really matters, right? And I think theory of constraints gives us a very practical way of doing that. It says you need to start with one clear goal. What is it that you want to do more of, faster, better, cheaper? What is that? Then find out what's the one thing, the one link that I must focus on and finish. And then keep that as your continuous improvement cycle, one thing at a time.
Very well said. What's something you used to believe about TOC that you have since changed your mind on?
Well, that's a good question. I think I am, it started off in manufacturing, right? And you think, okay, so this is mostly a manufacturing things, right? And what makes manufacturing so nice is because it's a kind of a captured system, right? You've got a little box, stuff comes in here and it flows out. When you're dealing with big complex systems like housing, water availability, drug, there's a tendency where you think, wow, maybe TOC can't apply to these really big systems. But that's where it can bring most of the value. There's a beautiful quote that I have on my wall. It's by the French physicist Jean-Baptiste Perrin.
Mm-hmm.
Said that the aim of all science is to substitute visible complexity for invisible simplicity, right? So if you think about E equal mc squared, right?
Yes.
It's mathematically a beautifully simple correlation, but it explains a huge amount of visible complexity in the world, right? And I think theory of constraints is based on that same fundamental principle that says this idea that there's always one thing, that if you just focused on that, you will improve the whole system. Doesn't matter whether that chain has got 3 links or 30,000 links. That is fundamentally true. But it takes a lot of courage to even attempt to find that inherent simplicity, that one thing to focus, because it's so easy to get overwhelmed.
Right. And finally, what does success look like for you now? Not just professionally, but personally.
So my motto has always been do good. So make a positive impact on the world. Second step is make money. Third step is repeat, right? And you have to do all 3 of those steps, I believe, to have a full and meaningful life. Some people, I have quite a few friends that are extremely successful. Their sequence was a little bit different. They made a lot of money, now are trying to do as much good as they can with it, and then repeat, right? To keep on fueling that cycle. So my personal goal, I like to think in terms of big steps, right? Not how to improve by 10%, but how to improve by 10x. Not by how to improve by 100%, by how to improve by 100x. So my personal goal is, how do I increase in the next 5 years of my life my impact and income by 100x, right? What should I be focusing on right now to make that not just possible, but inevitable? And I'll leave your listeners and viewers with this last thing, is I'm super passionate about helping people achieve impossible goals, right? Why do we call something impossible? It's a kind of a protection mechanism, right? If we say to ourselves and to others, oh, that's impossible, it means not only we don't have to try, we don't even have to think about trying. So how do you disrupt your mind? Because that is, to me, one of the most limiting assumptions or beliefs, is that it's impossible to do better, right? For me, for business. So the way to overcome it is with a very simple question that I discovered. Ask yourself or your team or your customers, it's impossible unless, and it's a disruptive question. If you ask yourself that question, you'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I was recently interviewed on a podcast by, Joe Polish, who's one of the most famous guys in the masterminds, etc. He runs a Genius Network. And he asked me, like, how could I apply this? I said, Joe, you planning to launch a new book, right? Called What's in It for Them. Beautiful book. If you haven't read it, you should read it. So he said, okay, great. So I said, what do you think, how much of this book you will sell? He said, well, based on past books, it will be somewhere between 10,000 and maybe 50,000 books. That will be good, right? I said, and what's your really stretched target? This is like 100,000. I said, okay, what would be an impossible goal? Is selling 1 million or 2 million, right? I said, okay, it's impossible to sell 1 million unless, and he looked at me and he started laughing. It's like immediately going, oh my God, you're so right. Unless I can get it featured on Oprah's book club, unless I can get Tony Robbins to promote it, unless, so you disrupt the mind by asking the question, it's impossible unless. So that's what I would love to leave your listeners and viewers with, is have the courage to set impossible goals and then just ask yourself and your team, it's impossible unless.
Profound, absolutely profound. And my last question before we conclude our today's conversation is, where can our audience reach you?
My social media handle is just Dr. Alan Barnard, AlanBarnard. So you can connect with me on YouTube. I have a channel there where I publish a lot of videos about insights that we've gained, case studies that we've been involved in. That's also my LinkedIn profile, my Facebook profile, TikTok, X, all of them are Dr. Alan Barnard. I also have a website, dralanbarnard.com. For those that are interested in some of the apps that we've developed, so my research lab, Golden Research Lab, the focus is on studying why people make and often repeat bad decisions. Based on that knowledge, we've developed a whole range of apps, including a series of digital twins that can be used by big companies to help them make better, faster decisions. That you can find on harmonyapps.com.
Right. Thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of our today's discussion. Alan, I've always believed that some of the biggest breakthroughs don't come from more information. They come from a shift in perspective. And what we've just heard from you isn't just a framework or a methodology. It's a different way of seeing the world. A way that tells us maybe we are not stuck because we are not working hard enough. Maybe we are stuck because we are working on the wrong thing. In an industry like life sciences, where the stakes are sky high and the systems are deeply complex, what Dr. Bernard has shared today is a powerful reminder that clarity is sometimes more valuable than effort, and that finding that constraint isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. Dr. Bernard, thank you. Thank you for bringing so much clarity, simplicity, and humanity to a topic that's often misunderstood or overlooked. Your stories, your examples, your ability to make the invisible visible will stay with our audience long after the episode ends. And to everyone listening, if there's one thing I hope you take away from this conversation, is that in every system, there's always one link that matters more than the rest. Find it, focus on it, and everything else will start to flow. This has been Drug Diaries. I'm Kaushik Trivedi, and today we learned what happened when TOC meets life sciences. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Dr. Bernard, for joining us. It was such a pleasure and an honor to host you on Drug Diaries.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.